Hi, I am Joanna Dela Cruz, and for the next chapter, which is chapter 4 of this title, Prohibitions Regarding Wages. And I have provided here a situation in which HQ, a hardware company which handles expensive tools, materials, equipments, and others, that provides regular salary and proper deduction of employees' benefits. And incautious actions of employees towards such tools and equipments if they totally damage due to negligence would be a concern. And later on, I will use this situation to give examples to the other articles that we may tackle later on. So for the first article in this chapter, which is Article 112, Non-Interference in Disposal of Wages. So let me read the article to you. Article 112, Non-Interference in Disposal of Wages. No employer shall limit or otherwise interfere with the freedom of any employee to dispose of his wages. He shall not in any manner force, compel, or oblige his employee to purchase merchandises, commodities, or other property from any other person, or otherwise make use of any store or service of such employer or any other person. So this Article 112, Non-Interference in Disposal of Wages, means that an employer cannot restrict or control how an employee spends their earned wages. For example, HQ employees, after they earned their wages, they have the freedom to waste it, or it depends on them what kind of purchases they will do. Next article, we have Article 113, Wage Deduction. No employer in his own behalf or in behalf of any person shall make any deduction from the wages of his employees, which means that this provision ensures that the protection of workers' wages from any authorized deductions, and also emphasize that wages are generally considered the property of the worker once earned, except for these cases. In cases where the worker is insured with his consent by the employer and the deduction is to recompense the employer for the amount paid by him as premium on the insurance. So basically, the worker is insured to with his consent towards his employer. So B, for union dues in cases where the right of the worker or his union to check off has been recognized by the employer or authorized in writing by the individual worker concerned. So this exception will be granted if the organization recognizes the unions that his or her employees are part of, in which unions check off, or basically means check off means automatically deduction of union dues. So C, in cases where the employer is authorized by the law or regulations issued by the Secretary of Labor and Employment. So we have in any organization, we have mandatory deductions like for life insurance and government taxes and so on. Next, we have Article 114, Deposits for Loss or Damage. No employer shall require his worker to make deposits from which deductions shall be made for the reimbursement of loss or any damage to tools, materials, or equipment supplied by the employer, except when the employer is engaged in such trades, occupations, or businesses where the practice of making deductions or requiring deposits is recognized one, or is necessary or desirable as determined by the Secretary of Labor and Employment in appropriate rules and regulations. For example, let's relate it to the given situation a while ago. HQ is a hardware company that handles expensive tools and equipments, as what I have said. So in this case, to the one that handles HQ company, he or she cannot make any deposits as reimbursement of loss or future damage, which can be may be deducted from the wages, but only in specific situations where such practice is recognized as necessary for the business and under strict conditions, ensuring the employee's responsibility for the loss is established. Next, we have Article 115 Limitations. No deduction from the deposits of any employee for the actual amount of the loss or damage shall be made unless the employee has been heard thereon and his responsibility has been clearly shown. So, which means an employer cannot deduct money from his or her employees' wages for loss or damage unless the employees give a fair hearing and the responsibility for the loss or damage is clearly established. Because this Article 115 also protects employees from arbitrary deductions from their salaries without due process. So, for you to know, arbitrary means doesn't based on reasons or evidences provided. Next, we have Article 116, Withhold Wages and Kickbacks Prohibited, in which this provision states that it is illegal for any employer to withhold any amount from employees' wages, including overtime, bonuses, and other benefits without a valid justification or valid reasons. This also includes the prohibitions of practicing these kickbacks where an employer forces an employee to give up like a portion of their earning through intimidation, threat, or other means and which also means that employer must pay their employees the full amount of their earned wages as agreed upon without any unauthorized deductions, because it is the employees right to have their wages fully, like there's no arbitrary deductions. Next article is Article 117, Deduction to Ensure Employment. In short, this provision means that it is illegal for an employer to deduct any amount from an employee's wages as a condition for ensuring or basically keeping their job. So this article prevents employers from forcing employees to accept deductions from their paycheck, of course, in charge for a promise or of continuous employment. Example, if HQ company do the evaluation of employees' performance or somewhat a termination, so basically there will be a tendency that someone will get fired if the result of the evaluation will be kind of bad. And employer also basically should not deduct any amount of money to ensure the employment of that certain employee, or else he or she might face this this article, and might face consequences in the future. Now, let's move on to Article 118, Retaliatory Measures. And it states that it shall be unlawful for an employer to refuse to pay or reduce the wages and benefits, discharge, or any other manner discriminate against any employee who has filed any complaint or institute any proceeding under this title or has testified or is about to testify in such proceedings, which basically means that an employer cannot penalize, discriminate against an employee who has filed a complaint or participated in a proceeding regarding their wages, benefits, or any working conditions. In addition, this provision protects employees against retaliation. Retaliation means to get revenge against someone. Therefore, Article 118 essentially protecting employees from any negative actions taken against them for exercising their right to raise concern or testify against their employer. For the last article under Chapter 4, Prohibition regarding wages, we have Article 119, False Reporting. It shall be unlawful for any person to make any statement, report, or record filed or kept pursuant to the provisions of this code, knowing such statement, report, or record to be false in any material respect. Which means, and I know that it is understandable since from the word false itself, so it is really a negative term toward labor matter. So it is really illegal for any person to knowingly submit a false statement, report, or any record essentially related to employment matters or outlined in labor code. And in addition, actually this article applies to any report or record filed with the Department of Labor and Employment or DOLE regarding employment matters, including information about employee details, wages, working conditions, or complaints. So essentially, this article prohibits the act of deliberately providing inaccurate information to the authorities regarding employment details and so on and so forth regarding, of course, employment. So that ends my report. Thank you for listening and hope you got something.